Hi, welcome everyone. My name's Chris. I am the host of NikonTV. And one thing you're going to notice kind of right off the bat is we are not in the usual setting that we are when we shoot. Well, no, we're not at Nikon's head office. We're actually in my kitchen. Now I say we, I actually mean me. Because Nikon is actually trying to do its part, not only for our employees, but also our customers, but also the community at large. So Nikon's trying to do its part to socially distance, to self-isolate, to make sure we're being as safe as possible. And because of that, we're still broadcasting right to you guys, but it's from my kitchen instead. So let's get to it. So today's episode, I want to go through a couple things. First off, I want to talk about the new firmware that we announced for the Z7 and the 6. This was back on February 18th, I think it was. This is version 3.0. I also want to talk about a new segment that I'm introducing. It's kind of called Getting to Know Your Camera. And in this new segment, I really want to talk about features that either people don't delve into, it's too difficult, it takes too much time, they don't really understand it, whatever the reason might be. I really want to use this new segment just to kind of bring those topics to the forefront, because there are a lot of options and a lot of features in our cameras that people don't necessarily go and take advantage of all the time. So in the comments below, throughout the episode, I just want you guys to write getting to know your camera, and then give me a topic that you guys want to hear about. I know that I already have 3 or 4 kind of bouncing around my head that I want to do for future episodes, but I want to hear from you guys. It can be anything from focus shift shooting to talking about the different autofocus modes, why to use one over the other. Anything you guys can think of, throw it down in the comments below, and I'll try and get to it as best I can. But let's start off with version 3.0 firmware. So like I said, this was announced for the Z cameras, the 6 and the 7, back in February 18th. And there was 4 major things that actually were improved on the 6 and 7 with that version 3.0. The first, being the one that probably got the most hype, was Animal Detect AF. Now, one of the things, when you actually see it in the menu itself, it's not actually labeled as dog and cat. It is labeled as Animal Detect AF. And if we actually go through the menu here, you'll actually see it, Auto Area AF / eye detection. And if you go in here, you will see face and eye detection, face detection, and now animal detection as well. But if you actually read through in that little blurb at the bottom, it does say eye and face detection is enabled for dogs and cats. That is very key because people hear animals and they think it's going to work for every animal, whether it's birds, dogs, cats, lions, zebras. It doesn't matter, that it's going to work for all of them. And the algorithm is specifically designed for dogs or cats. I do have a coworker out west, Jay, who was going by a field and he happened to see a whole field worth of goats. So he jumped out of his car, because it's Jay, and he went and started taking shots of them. And he noticed, oh my God, Animal Detect AF is actually working on these goats. Now, that is most likely due to the fact that the morphology of goats is very similar to certain dogs, just with the snout and the placement of the eyes. So if you do have an animal that is similar to how dogs or cats look in terms of their facial structures, then it may work. But it is not designed for that way. It is designed specifically for dogs or cats. And that's actually one other point that I'll bring up, is you will see in the menu that it is obviously very specific: animal detection and face or eye detection for humans. That's a big distinction, because the algorithm that the camera is using to figure out what's an eye, what's a face, is it animal, is it human, are very separate. So you have to keep in the back of your head when you are shooting, are you taking pictures of a human? Make sure it's set to face and eye detect. Or are you shooting pictures of your dog or cat at home? In that case, make sure you turn on animal detect. So just making sure that we're clear as to when to use those. And to kind of take that even a little bit further, when I think of animal detect, for me, the best results that I've been able to get of it are when I'm thinking about shooting an animal portrait. So don't think about your dog running around the dog park, 50 miles an hour with other dogs jumping in between with a stick in his mouth. The way it's really designed is for at home or outside, but for the animal, whether it's the dog or the cat, that's just kind of sitting there, it's posing for you. So it's a little bit slower action. It's not designed for that dog that's zipping around the dog park. So keep that in mind when you are going and using this mode. Now, as we can kind of see through some examples that we're going to be popping up over top of me here, we have some dogs, we have some cats. They are designed more for portraiture, as you can see from these examples. This last one here is actually a video of one of my coworkers, Jacob. He has this beautiful little Jack Russell Terrier. It is usually crazy, he informs me, but he was able to get it to nicely behave for him with some treats. So using the Animal Detect AF, you can very clearly see, and I actually asked him, can you jump back and forth between the eyes? And you can see it jumping back and forth. The little arrow pointing left or right, you can actually select which eye if the camera can see both of them at the same time. So Animal Detect AF was the first major improvement for version 3.0. The second was actually for me, the more important of the two. For me, this was Subject Tracking AF. And Subject Tracking AF, it still works very similar to it, but the functionality, the quickness of how to actually re-engage your subject while you're in the midst of trying to track something is way, way faster. So for me, that's the biggest improvement when it comes to subject tracking. Now, I'm going to show you a quick little demonstration here. You can see here that I'm in auto area. So I'm in auto area AFC mode. And when you're in auto area, I've actually gone and dedicated this function 2 button on the bottom to instantly activate subject tracking. So what I will show you here is when I punch the function 2 button now, whoop, there we go, there goes the little target box. And now as soon as I go and press and hold the AF button, whether it's the back button or the front, it's going to turn into a yellow box and instantly start to track my subject. Okay, well this is great. If anybody has used version 2.0 or 2.1 on the Zs, you'll notice that this is very similar. But the biggest difference is what happens at this point if I lose track of my subject or I just want to re-engage a different subject. Well, previously, I would have to hit the OK button, cancel out of it, and go back in, and by that time my subject is most likely moved. But in this case, all I have to do is get off autofocus, and you'll see that the AF box instantly resets itself right back to the initial starting point. So again, right in the middle, I'm focusing, tracking any which way I want, close, far, to the side, to the corner, and as soon as I get off autofocus, it instantly reverts to the center. So for me, that extra quick functionality when I'm in the process of shooting is the biggest benefit for the subject tracking firmware improvement that we see in version 3.0. Now, next, what else do we get in version 3.0? Well, I hold in my hands the Z70-200 2.8 S-line lens. This spectacular lens has a few different functions that we haven't had in other Z-line lenses. So one of them being the fact that we have lens function button 1 and lens function button 2. So we can actually customize 2 different buttons on this lens by going into the actual camera's menu. Well, if you didn't have or if you don't have version 3.0, you can only go and customize lens function 1. You do not have the ability to get access to customize lens function 2 button. With version 3.0, you now can. One other small little thing, you actually have a focus limiter switch here on the end of the barrel. So this limiter switch is similar to what we've had in other products where if you're shooting, let's say, through a fence or through a window and you don't want the lens to pick up that thing that's closer, being the fence or the dirty window, all you can do is switch the focus limiter from full to, in this case, it's 5 meters to infinity. So anything within 15 meters will never be focused on because to the lens, it doesn't exist. So that's a really handy little feature, and this is not going to be available to you if you do not have version 3.0 firmware on your camera. So that's a definitely needed function. in terms of that lens. And lastly, the fourth thing that we have with the version 3.0 firmware is the new compatibility for CF Express cards. So right now with version 3.0, we have full compatibility with CF Express with Sony, ProGrade, and Lexar cards. So that had kind of, in the grand scheme of things, was what we introduced with version 3.0. Next, I want to go and jump into something a little bit different. So I want to start this new getting to know your camera segment. So I've kind of said that I want you guys to tell me in the comments below what you want to hear about. But for this episode right now, I want to talk about AF fine-tuning your lenses, specifically with the auto AF fine-tune feature we have in a number of our cameras. So kind of before we get into there, we're going to be plugging a link below. Go and hit that link for all the information that you want about auto AF fine-tuning your lens. That link is going to take you to a YouTube page, and it's going to be the Nikon Canada page where we've done an entire video on auto AF fine-tuning. It'll let you scrub through it. You can find the exact moment. You can pause. You can go backwards, forwards. So there's a lot of information in that video. I would highly recommend taking a look at it. But before that, I will go through a few of the major points for why AF fine-tuning, and specifically auto AF fine-tuning, is so important to do and to figure out if you need to do. Now, before I kind of get into the how to do it, or even why you need to do it, let's talk about the different autofocus modes in your DSLR. Now, I make very sure to say DSLR because if you are shooting with a mirrorless camera, one of our Z6, 7, the 50, then those cameras, because all of the autofocus actually is based directly off the sensor itself, technically we don't need to do AF fine-tuning. It should always be perfect. But for your DSLR, you should be seeing a graphic that pops up that actually shows you on the top. It's going to show you what happens to your camera, to your DSLR, when you're shooting in live view. And on the bottom image is what happens with your camera when you shoot through the viewfinder. So those are two different types of autofocus that are activated for each of those different options. For the viewfinder option, the type of autofocus is called phase detect, not face, but phase, P-H-A-S-E. And that phase detect relies on a separate autofocus sensor or module actually in the bottom of the camera. So you have the light, if you follow that orange beam bounces off the mirror and it actually hits a small little sub-mirror that sends some light down. That light that's bouncing down actually hits the AF sensor. Now, due to the fact that you have the AF sensor in a totally different spot than the actual focal plane, than the sensor, which is actually going to be creating the photo, there can occasionally be variance between where the camera thinks it should focus and where it actually contacts the sensor. So that's the reason why we need to do AF fine-tuning, because there's sometimes that variance. Now, to contrast that, the one above viewfinder, live view autofocus, that type of autofocus is called contrast detect autofocus. And it's a slower type of autofocus, but very precise and very accurate. So it is going to be 100% accurate pretty much, which means that every time you use it, it's going to be the same and it's going to be almost perfect. Now, why does that make a difference? Well, this kind of brings me to the first part, which is how do you know when or if you need to actually AF fine-tune your lens? A lot of people don't. They'll just randomly do it or they'll never do it because they're so unsure. So I have a very quick test that you can do, and we're going to use those two different types of autofocus. So what you're going to do, you're going to grab a tripod. You're going to get some sort of lens test, a newspaper, something with a lot of contrast, stick it on a wall. You're going to focus on it while looking through the viewfinder and take a picture. Making sure you're on the tripod, you're nice and steady, you have a lot of light. The video that we link to below goes through all of this. So you're going to take that one shot, and then you're going to compare it by going directly into live view, refocusing, and taking that same shot again. Take those two files, throw them on your computer, and now you're going to go and analyze the two of those photos. When you go and look at the two of them, if they're perfectly the same, that means that the contrast detect autofocus, which remember is always going to be perfect, is giving the same reading as the phase detect, which means you're all done here, your body and your lens are perfectly matched up. But what happens if you do not have the exact same reading between one and the other photo? Well, at that point, it does mean that you should be doing some AF fine tuning. Now, what should you be looking for when it comes to AF fine tuning, and what are the pictures going to show from one to the other? Well, they're either going to be ideal, which if you see the graphic that we have up over top right now, this is showing using a lens test, lens calibration tool. It has a nice little ruler set at 45 degrees. You have a target you're going to focus on, and that ruler is really key because it will now show whether it's back or front focusing from where you've told it to focus. So this image that you're seeing here, it's showing an ideal autofocus. You've told it to focus at the 0 mark, and pretty much the depth of the focal plane is pretty much within that 0, and it looks great. But if you have a camera that has a slight variance to back focus, you're going to see an image such as this, where that focus has actually shifted back. Or you could see the opposite, where you could actually have it shifted forwards, which is called front focusing. So at that point, if you're seeing any of these type of things, you are absolutely going to need to do AF fine tune. Now, AF fine tune, I'm kind of using them, AF fine tune and auto AF fine tune interchangeably, but that's not the case. They do the same thing, but one makes it way easier than the other. So AF fine tune, we've had in our cameras since around 2008. So every camera pretty much above a D7000 series and up will have a form of AF fine tune. But everything since the D5 and D500, so that's D5, D6, D500, D7500, D780, D850, all of those cameras now have an auto AF fine tune feature. The main difference is AF fine tune, you have to do all the work, which could mean, depending on how quick you are and how efficient you are at this entire process, it could take upwards of 30-45 minutes, depending on how particular you are, because you have to do every single step yourself. It gets a little laborious, and most people don't really want to do it. And that is why we came up with Auto AF Fine Tune. Auto AF Fine Tune basically allows the camera to automate the whole process. You essentially have it set up with your beautiful test chart, nicely well lit on a tripod. You have the whole 9 yards set up. And then you just essentially push 2 buttons, activate Auto AF Fine Tune, and the camera will automatically compare those 2 autofocus types we were talking about before, phase detect and contrast detect, compare the readings from 2 of them, and it will automatically go and set your reading for you. Now, there's a little bit more to it than that. I don't want to go through it and have you guys listen to me here and then listen to Mark in the video that we linked to. So go and watch that video, see all the small little fine details to go and pay attention to. But just remember that if in the past you have tried to AF fine tune your lens and you got annoyed with it, you got frustrated, you weren't sure what to do, the video will show you. But if you have one of the newer cameras with auto AF fine tune, it really takes all the guesswork out of it and allows the camera to do all the work for you. Okay, now that's great in the fact that it automates everything for you, but we've actually taken it a little bit of a step further for the D6 and the D780. They actually have a new feature built in, because what happens, so let's say I have the 70-200 f2.8 FL. This is obviously the Z lens. What if I have the DSLR version and I go and want to fine tune it? Well, what focal length do I do it at? Well, the video tells you, don't worry, but we recommend use the longest focal length. So at a 70-200, I'd set it to 200, and that's going to do most cases. But to really make sure that you have the most ability to customize your lens to make sure it's working perfectly, with the D6 and the D780, we now have the ability to set a wide and a tele fine-tune setting. So this just really kind of opens up the door with those two new cameras to just make sure that your lenses are working as best as they possibly can for you. All right, so I hope that this getting to know your camera segment worked for you guys. I'm going to try and keep it not too techy, which is why we usually have some supplemental information such as the video that we're linking to. But before we go today, I want to end off with one last little thing, because a lot of us, hopefully, are self-isolating, we're socially distancing ourselves, and that's fantastic. But that also means that we have a little bit more extra time on our hands than we normally would. So because of that, I'm going to go and start, at least for the next couple weeks, an interesting reads segment where we're going to go and throw some links into the comments below that will give you guys something to hopefully be inspired in, hopefully shoot something around your own house, whether it's bird photography in your backyard, whether it's seeing the beautiful shadows and light that you get from inside the house, whether you have dogs, kids, loved ones around you. Whatever you want to do or get inspired to shoot when you're at home self-isolating, I want to try and go and maybe inspire you a little bit more. So today's link that I'm putting down below is actually to Joe McNally's blog. Now, hopefully you guys have heard of Joe McNally. He's an absolute phenomenal photographer. He is a Nikon ambassador for the USA, and oh my God, I'm not surprised. Why? Because he is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. He can do pretty much anything. He's known mostly for his flash work, for flash somewhat on camera, but mostly getting it off camera and doing really large projects. So the link that I'm setting down below, he used so many flashes that it almost boggles your mind, and he combined them using radio, optical, the SU4 mode. He used strobes as well. He used as many flashes as he could literally fit into this scene. And it's a really, really cool way to get inspired to say, well, I may not be able to shut down a street and get so many extras and so many this and that, but what can I do at home with a couple different flashes? Maybe gel them, maybe play with them. So for my interesting reads, it's going to be Joe McNally's blog. I'm just giving you the one link for his street scene that he shot, but I'm pretty sure at least most of you are going to go, huh, Joe is not only educational, but he's really, really entertaining the way he writes as well. So you're probably going to go down a really deep, dark rabbit hole watching way more of his blogs than you'd kind of expected. But I highly recommend it. He is so good. And the next Nikon TV episode that we do, I'm going to throw in some more interesting reads to help you guys pass the time, get more inspired, and shoot a little bit more. So for me, Chris, thanks very much, guys. I'll see you in the next Nikon TV episode.